In this video, we will be discussing the friar. There was a friar, a wanton one and merry, a limiter, a very festive fellow. Okay, well, first let's define what a friar is. He is a member of the clergy class, and according to your footnote, it says that he was a member of a religious group sworn to poverty and living on charitable donations. Okay, so this is a guy who is supposed to be spending his time amongst the poor, okay, living his life of poverty, and living off of others' donations. So keep that in your mind. In all four orders there was none so mellow, so glib with a gallant phrase and well-turned speech. He'd fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. So just in these first few lines, Chaucer reveals to us that this friar is not a good guy. Okay, look at those last two lines that I just read to you. He'd fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. Okay, so what Chaucer is implying here is that this friar goes out amongst like the country folk, amongst these uneducated people, okay, these girls that don't know any better, right? They're gonna do what the church tells them. They look up to the clergy, and he seduces these young women, and he gets them pregnant, and then he'll pay off the local men, so the local farmer, the local blacksmith, etc., to marry these women, and therefore sweeping under the rug, covering up what he has done to them. Okay, so he is a very bad guy. And unfortunately, we see this happen throughout history, right? These men in power taking advantage of those that can't fight back or don't know how to fight back for themselves. And we see that in today's society, okay? But apparently, sadly, it was also happening during Chaucer's time. He was a noble pillar to his order, highly beloved and intimate was he, with county folk within his boundary, and city dames of honor and possessions, for he was qualified to hear confessions. Or so he said, with more than priestly scope. He had a special license from the Pope. So back in Chaucer's time, if you wanted your confession to be heard, right, you would go to the local friar, etc., pay him money, and then he would hear your confession. Okay, so it's different from nowadays. You can go to your local Catholic church, right? Your priest will hear your confession. You don't have to pay them money to hear your confession. But that's how it was back in Chaucer's time. And again, you had to have this special license from the Pope in order to be able to hear people's confessions. But notice how Chaucer phrases this for the friar. For he was qualified to hear confessions, or so he said. So this is implying that the friar does not have a special license from the Pope to hear confessions, so he's lying about that, but he's still hearing people's confessions because he wants the money. Okay, so this is how the friar is getting the money to then pay, right, those local men, the blacksmiths, farmers, etc., to marry these girls that he is seducing. Sweetly he heard his penitence at shrift, with pleasant absolution for a gift. He was an easy man in penance giving, where he could hope to make a decent living. It's a sure sign whenever gifts are given to a poor order that a man's well shriven. And should he give enough he knew in verity, the penitent repented in sincerity. For many a fellow is so hard of heart, he cannot weep for all his inward smart. Therefore, instead of weeping in a prayer, one should give silver for a poor friar's care. Okay. So this friar is such a corrupt person on so many different levels. Like I said, he would hear people's confessions for if they paid him. But he took it a step further than that. These people would come to him, pay him money to hear their confessions. However, if you did not pay him what he deemed to be enough money, he would hear your confession, okay, he would listen to you, but then he would say, you know what, I just don't feel like you're repentant enough for your sins, so why don't you come back tomorrow? Why don't you come back, in a few days with some more money, and I'll listen to your confession again, and maybe that time you truly will be sorry. Okay, so this guy is so corrupt, right? Like, you better pay him enough money or else, like, he's gonna lie to you and say that your sins aren't forgiven. But again, this is how he's making the money, right? For these different situations he has going on, even though he's supposed to be living a life of poverty. He kept his tippet stuffed with pins for curls and pocket knives to give to pretty girls. Okay, so just a real creep here. He's buying these little trinkets to keep in his pocket, and that's how he's luring these little country women in, okay, these girls in. He's giving them gifts, right, and then luring them in. Just a real creep of a guy. And certainly his voice was gay and sturdy, for he sang well and played the hurdy-gurdy. Okay, number one, hurdy-gurdy is just a fun thing to say, hurdy-gurdy. But the hurdy-gurdy, if you look it up, it was this type of instrument that kind of looks like a violin, but not really, but that kind of size and shape. And lots of like intricate designs on it a lot of times if you look at pictures of the old ones. And then some of them have this almost like miniature piano, like some piano keys on it. It's just kind of a fun looking instrument if you ever have the time to look it up. But the friar played the hurdy-gurdy. At sing-songs he was champion of the hour. His neck was wider than a lily flower, but strong enough to butt a bruiser down. He knew the taverns well in every town, and every innkeeper and barmaid too, better than lepers, beggars, and that crew. For in so eminent a man as he, it was not fitting with the dignity of his position, dealing with the scum of wretched lepers. Nothing good can come of commerce with such slum and gutter dwellers, but only with the rich and victual sellers. Okay. This friar, he is not spending his time among the poor people, because, ooh, that's repulsive, right? According to him, why would he want to do that, even though that's what he's supposed to be doing? Instead, he's spending all of his time at the taverns, drinking. But anywhere a profit might accrue, courteous he was, and lowly of service too. Natural gifts like his were hard to match. He was the finest beggar of his batch, and for his begging district paid a rent. His brethren did no poaching where he went, for though a widow mightn't have a shoe, so pleasant was his holy how do you do, he got his farthing from her just the same before he left, and so his income came to more than he laid out. And how he romped just like a puppy. He was ever prompt to arbitrate disputes on settling days, for a small fee, in many helpful ways. Not then appearing as your cloistered scholar, with threadbare habit hardly worth $1. Sorry, there's the announcement just then. So let me reread those last few lines because this is pointing out something else to us regarding the friar. Chaucer says, not then appearing as your cloistered scholar, with threadbare habit hardly worth $1, but much more like a doctor or a pope. Okay. So this guy is supposed to be living a life of poverty, but Chaucer tells us, not then appearing as your cloistered scholar with threadbare habit hardly worth $1. Okay, so he's not wearing this basic garment that you would think of someone that doesn't have much money is wearing, but instead it tells us that his robes were much more like a doctor or a pope. So this guy who is supposed to be living a life of poverty has robes that are as nice as a doctor's or a pope's. Again, he's getting this money to buy these nice robes from these different venues that he's taking on, like confessions and so forth, that he's not supposed to be doing, okay, that he's not supposed to be getting money from. Of double worsted was the semi-cope upon his shoulders, and the swelling fold about him, like a bell about its mold when it is casting, rounded out his dress. He lisped a little out of wantonness to make his English sweet upon his tongue. When he had played his harp, or having sung, his eyes would twinkle in his head as bright as any star upon a frosty night. This worthy's name was Hubert, it appeared. So although there's several just really corrupt and sometimes sad characteristics about this friar, I think what makes it even sadder is this last line where Chaucer tells us this friar's actual name, okay, which is Hubert. Again, we don't know most of the pilgrims' actual names, right? We just know them by their professions. And as a reminder, when Chaucer gives us the actual name of a pilgrim, that means he based that character off of someone that he knew. So sadly, that means that there was a friar walking around during Chaucer's time doing these things, okay, which is very sad, but also just a fact of society throughout the ages. So again, his name was Hubert. Not a good guy. Chaucer certainly does not like the friar.